Africa, a continent filled with families, traditions, and laws, a place where civilizations had existed since the beginnings of mankind, a place where tribal ties and family histories were everything. For a few minutes, let's reflect on the journey through time when these men, women, and children were snatched from their homes, kicking and screaming, tied, chained, and dragged through the thick and treacherous foliage of Africa. There was no such word as kind. Mauled and shackled, betrayed and demeaned, our ancestors were conditioned to subservience. The game was about submission, the ultimate surrender of pride and self-esteem. Did anyone hear our cries? It seemed pointless as the days went by. Money, currency, tinder, or whatever it was called, was the meat of the pie. And so we came to this Western world, and our hair was tight with neat little curls. Africans were kidnapped from their homelands and transported to a strange and hostile place where their families were split up and sold like cattle among the owning classes of North and South America. Let us for a moment study the determination of the enslaved and their families to escape the unlawful and finally immoral imprisonment.
We found ourselves in a foreign land. The conditioning began.
In the mid-18th century, America itself began to question the inhuman practice of forced servitude. There had always been those who understood that slavery and class based on racial identity was wrong and unsustainable. Eventually, a system of rest stops, codes, and hiding places, called the Underground Railroad, was formed to smuggle African Americans to freedom in Canada, many times through Buffalo, New York. Buffalo was the stage for the last leg of Harriet Tubman's escape route to Canada. John Brown's activism, and Millard Fillmore's fugitive slave hunters. Buffalo was at the center of the storm. Black abolitionists, orators such as satirist Soldier Martin Delany, Frederick Douglass, and William Wells Brown all spoke in Buffalo. At the Michigan Ave Baptist Church. Since 1845, the small brick building has been located in the heart of the Michigan District, which was primarily a place where free blacks lived and thrived, worked and debated, spoke and agitated. When the country's conscience erupted and our Civil War broke out, the Michigan Ave Baptist Church even became a recruiting post for African American soldiers. Many of these soldiers of color died defending the Constitution in this divided time. Our great American Civil War decimated the slave society. Southern crops were burned and their edifices destroyed. Physical reconstruction was begun after the war, but black families and friendships were reconstructing as well. We formed ties again and rose from the embers. As the devastating war ended and blacks began to reevaluate their place in the American dream, the little church continued to influence the nation's course. Men and women such as the church's pastor, the Reverend Jesse Nash, W.E.B. Du Bois, and congregant Mary Talbot used the church as a platform to start the Niagara movement, which later morphed into the NAACP. Racist events such as the Pan American World's Fair African Exhibition of 1901, where blacks were portrayed as overtly primitive savages, was a particular target of Mary Talbot's politics. She was also an extremely effective activist in opposition to the practice of lynching, which was practiced on blacks and other minorities throughout the nation's history. Mary Talbot and Jesse Nash provided space and support for W.E.B. Du Bois and his radical intellectual circle. So they were able to organize and start the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The NAACP then started what some call the Second American Revolution, our civil rights movement. Once again, the little church on Michigan Avenue had profoundly influenced world affairs.
This little church that helped to change the world is now surrounded by empty lots and a gas station. However, things used to be a bit more lively.
Stealing a glance, taking a chance, trying romance, but when your eyes hang out that danger sign, ooh, kick-a-rooney.
Michigan, William, and Broadway was a special place for music and merriment. These streets housed such venues as the Vendome, Kearns, the Moonglow, the Colored Musicians Club, and the Little Harlem Hotel. Everybody played there. Duke Ellington, Nat King Cole, Billie Holiday, Cab Calloway, Charlie Parker, and thousands of others. Professionals and racketeers, factory workers, and ladies of the evening all came together. The scene bridged the Roaring Twenties to the Great Depression of the 30s, to the tumults of the Second World War. Musicians such as Bing Crosby, Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, and Dizzy Gillespie often jammed at Buffalo's Colored Musicians Club or the Little Harlem Hotel.
The joint was jumping. People were re-ragging and jamming the night away. From vaudeville to bebop, the Michigan corridor saw it all. Little Harlem saw it all.
In World War II, approximately 1,154,700 blacks, both male and female, served throughout that conflict. 367,000 served in World War I, and 200,000 served in the Civil War. African Americans have always taken on the duties and bore the scars that accompany war. We've fought on the front lines with valor and ingenuity, and reliably in the supply chains, tended to the wounded and buried our dead. We have sent our sons and daughters to die alongside those who dream that the American ideal of equality, citizenship, and commonality is worth it. Worth dying for.
Factors such as veterans' benefits and a greater global experience also brought blacks into the light after the darkness of enslavement. We established black schools and universities, ran our own towns, and engaged in commercial ventures. Blacks began to add to the ranks of American culture, with professionals and intellectuals, scientists and poets, entrepreneurs and visionaries. However, as our eyes opened, we became aware of new battles that lie ahead. The doctrine of separate but equal was separating us from the quilt. Jim Crow, a set of laws established throughout the South after the Civil War, was used to keep African Americans from enjoying the same quality of life that whites enjoyed matter-of-factly. The difference between white schools and African American schools was severe. The laws of the country were still leaving many blacks with no choices in life but that of servitude and poverty. In spite of the age-old indoctrinations, we began to think for ourselves.
We persevered.
We conquered our fears.
We endured. We protested. We argued before the Supreme Court.
We conquered our fears.
We rose to attain the natural position of equal opportunity in America. We rose
against violence,
against repression, against the
dull
dull fog of ignorance.
We
rose
and will always rise.
These are the eyes of the beholder. Now, if you can remember the eyes of Martin the Beholder, look then at this generation switch to this young black woman, and you see the eyes of hope and longing and excitement. Freedom now is what she is thinking. We can only hope she is still living in 2009 to see her longing and hope manifest in Barack Obama, President of these United States of America, where justice for blacks was met out at the end of a rope. These are the eyes of the beholder. The Declaration states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
But let's not forget about the not-so-little church. Buffalo, New York has a great landmark preservation tradition, which contains the narrative of our common struggles and our shared triumphs as a city. Our very own Michigan Ave Baptist Church has to stay standing so we can maintain a living beacon that shines for this community of Buffalo and the courage and the common sense of its citizens. Its maintenance is profoundly important for the generations of kids to come, and for their parents to be able to point and say, "Look at what we did, see how we were." This still living church stands as a testimonial to the idea that this is a city of consequence, whose inhabitants have always been able to play an effective role on the world stage. That we as citizens of Buffalo have always risen to the tasks at hand, and will do so again and again